Hello, Politics Plus Media 101 listeners. Today's episode is part 2 of our discussion with TVBS news anchor, military correspondent, and foreign correspondent Tingting Liu. She is based in Taiwan, and we discuss all things Taiwan, US, and China. In today's episode, among other things, we get into China's proposed 2027 timeline for being militarily ready to invade Taiwan. We also get into US response and what we're doing with sending arms to Taiwan. So give it a listen and let us know what you think by rating and subscribing to our show. Ting, I want to start out with what's been making the news here in the United States. And we got to be careful not to. The West typically portrays the relations between China and Taiwan in a hyperbolic way that tries to exacerbate the tensions and make war seem imminent. So we don't want to do that. And on that note, recently, Taiwan has rejected applications by Chinese tourism officials to enter the island for international travel fair next month. They cited the cross-strait relations with China as the reason for denying these visas. From an outsider's perspective, it feels that tensions are really high between China and Taiwan with military incursions, the planes, and everything of the sort. How do you view the relations between China and Taiwan, maybe relative to the last decade? Are they more tense than normal? Is this business as usual? What should we understand?
I would say that the cross-strait relations, no doubt, has taken a serious dive for the worst, especially in the past year. And this actually stems quite obvious from Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And subsequently, there's also President Tsai's and McCarthy's meetup in LA that happened in April. So both of which was immediately followed by the PLA's military exercise that's around Taiwan. It's not a very simple exercise, I would say, because it's technically a military blockade that the Chinese have been practicing and have put in place. And what is actually worse than a practice military blockade is the fact that the Chinese, it's more than ever wanting to show to the world that they are trying to erase every ambiguity that they have sort of tolerated happen that's around Taiwan for the past 2 to 3 decades, especially. So one of the ambiguity that what we call the cross-strait could coexist peacefully is the existence of the Taiwan Straits Median Line. So in last year's August, after Pelosi visited Taiwan, what the Chinese PLA did is that they have actually flew multiple PLA military aircraft across the Taiwan Median Strait. A median line is actually a concept that is not recognized by the PRC, but it is a line that is also not recognized internationally. But it is just this ambiguous line that happens to be drawn across the Taiwan Strait that divides both sides. So in terms of military activities, each side will tend to stay within their side. So in Taiwan, it will be the east side of the median line. For China, it will be the west side of the median line. But since August last year, we have seen that the PLA have actively trying to tell the world that this median line does not exist, so they can fly around Taiwan wherever they want to. And they do not only fly around Taiwan, but they have sent naval ships around Taiwan, essentially a naval blockade. They have sent unmanned aircraft vehicle, basically UAVs, drones that circle 1 round, 2 rounds around Taiwan to show that Taiwan is part of theirs. And in April this year, they have sent the PLA aircraft carrier Shandong aircraft carrier to the eastern waters of Taiwan. So that's obviously very close to the Japanese. Basically, it's within the Japanese economic exclusive zone, the EEZs, very near the Pacific Oceans. And they have also taken off their J-15s, multiple J-15s from the aircraft carrier in attempt, to show that they are basically able to to form a effective blockade around Taiwan. When we talk about what is an effective blockade, one thing is to obviously not only to circle around Taiwan, but is to cut off every single possible foreign assistance, be it from Japan, be it from the US bases in Japan, or be it from the US bases in the Philippines or Guam. So any possible foreign military assistance, this aircraft carriers and this PLA Navy ships will be able to block quite effectively from their various positions, on the eastern waters, the Bashi Straits. They have basically positioned, all their ships and aircrafts there, in attempt to cut off any aid towards Taiwan. And in terms of within the international audience or towards in the media, they have been stressing that Taiwan is a domestic issue. So this is one thing. I mean, no doubt they have always said that, Taiwan is part of China, Taiwan is part of China. They say everywhere, but they have tried to put it in lawful terms, to try to stress that, any attempts to cross the Taiwan Strait is a direct handling on a direct movement in China's domestic affairs.
Now to the rising tensions between the United States and China, highlighted in two recent close calls. On Saturday, a Chinese warship crossed in front of an American destroyer in the Taiwan Strait. And last week, a Chinese fighter jet flew across the path of a U.S. plane, causing turbulence. Elizabeth Palmer is following all of this from Tokyo. Liz, good morning. Can you explain what's going on here?
Good morning. This close call on the high seas was not only dangerous, it was caught on video by a journalist for the whole world to see. And it happened just as the U.S. and China's top defense officials had been in the same room at the same conference, which on any other day wouldn't have attracted a lot of attention. China's General Li Shangfu used his first high-profile international appearance to address the weekend's incident with some blunt advice for the U.S. Keep your ships and planes away. He was referring to this, a close call on Saturday when a Chinese warship crossed the course of an American destroyer so close it had to slow down to avoid a collision. Last week, a Chinese fighter jet cut across the flight path of a U.S. reconnaissance plane. General Li didn't address the Chinese decision-making that led to the incidents, but implied the U.S. was ultimately responsible. To avoid similar encounters, he said the U.S. should steer clear of the area around China. Mind your own business.
I think it's quite evident in the start of June when the U.S. and Canadian ship actually transited through the Taiwan Strait. And there was actually this very dangerous maneuver by one of the PLA naval ships, which was actually caught by Canadian press that actually cut in front of the U.S. Navy vessel. And so there is no doubt a very clear attempt, to show to the world that the Taiwan Strait plus Taiwan is part of their domestic affairs. And I think in terms of international, what the voices they try to voice internationally is that, I was actually at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore in June back then. I'm not sure whether this is actually picked up by the Western media. But we should see that the Chinese has been trying very hard to cut off US intervention in Asia-Pacific affairs. How this is actually done? When the Chinese defense minister made his debut speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, he actually did it by two ways. One thing is that obviously he didn't meet with Austin in Singapore. And the second thing, during his debut speech, he did not use the US term Indo-Pacific. Throughout his 40-minute speech, he used the term Asia-Pacific. So obviously he is trying to say that there's any issues that's happening within Asia it belongs to Asia-Pacific. It is not this idea of Indo-Pacific. It is not concerned the US, it is not concerned India. Anything is between China and the respective countries. And Taiwan is part of China. So anybody handling is meddling and putting their fingers in the wrong pie. So this is what they are trying to do. And one thing is that we also have seen a shift in the Chinese stance towards the US, is that in the past, they used to say that, oh, the Pacific Ocean is wide enough for US and China to navigate. But if you notice within the past year, that the Chinese government has actually changed the line to say that the world is wide enough for US and China to move freely. So what they are is essentially trying to say is that it's not the Pacific Ocean, it's the world. So you US should not come to this part of the world. You US should not come to Pacific Ocean. So I would say that the Chinese is a circle of people, very good at handling their words. It is through these various nuances that you have no doubt seen that the Chinese intention on Taiwan is stronger than ever. And obviously that will actually bring out to a lot of foreign audience that whether, right now is Taiwan the hot spot? Will Taiwan become the next Ukraine? I would actually imagine this is what most people will ask for. I would say that Taiwan, it's unfortunately sort of instrumentalized in many of these affairs right here. Because I would say that in Taiwan right now, people when we go out there, people still go to work, people still go to school, quite on a normal basis. There isn't like a sense of imminent war that will happen within tomorrow. But no doubt, more of these topics are discussed within Taiwan. More Taiwanese people are actually discussing whether we are effectively prepared for any of this incoming unfortunate kind of invasion from China right now.
After Pelosi's visit, there was a report from the CIA that said the PRC, so China, wants to be prepared to be able to invade Taiwan within 4 years. That doesn't mean they want to invade Taiwan, but they want to be prepared to invade Taiwan. You said that people in Taiwan are going about their lives in a normal fashion. We just spoke about domestic politics in Taiwan, which is being carried right now by a Me Too movement that seems very healthy. And more so than in recent years, it's the domestic issues than the cross-strait relations. How do Taiwanese military officials view the possibility of an invasion with Taiwan? Is one viewed as definitely going to happen and imminent, or is it viewed as something that could happen and we need to prepare for it?
The Taiwanese military, they actually viewed this with a lot of care. So in the sense that the official military stance is that they will prepare for any unforeseeable and any unfortunate incidents. And they are actually trying very hard to prepare as much as they could. But the issue has to do with whether the military reform is quick enough, that they are able to withstand a PLA attack. And on top of that, whether the military articles that Taiwan currently holds now are good enough, or whether we are combat ready enough, to fight a possible invasion. Because, we are looking at, let's say a war really happened in Taiwan, it is a very different landscape from what we are seeing in Ukraine. In Ukraine, I mean, you have the war happening in the eastern part of Ukraine, near Russia there, and any foreign aid could actually come from the western part of Ukraine, through Lviv, through the Polish border. Now that is how the Western counterparts could aid Ukraine. But the problem with Taiwan is that one good thing is that the fact that Taiwan is surrounded by waters, so that will actually make any PLA attempts on an amphibious assault on Taiwan very difficult. But that is also exactly the part that makes helping Taiwan difficult. Let's say if China practice a military blockade around Taiwan, will there be a safe air passage, water passage for any foreign military assistance to help Taiwan? That is one thing. And then we are actually seeing many of these US congressmen and the people from the Capitol, senators, flying to Taiwan. And I think they are actually looking at this quite carefully. And we actually did see reports and all these war games that they actually try to play within the capital to look at whether there are any possible way to help Taiwan. And the verdict was always, they will have to arm Taiwan with enough missiles, with enough ammunition in time for any possible invasion.
What do we know about this potential invasion? Actually, I mean, we know there's intent, but is there actually going to be delivery?
We know from the CIA annual threat assessment that it says Chairman Xi has told the People's Liberation Army to be ready, completely ready for an invasion of Taiwan by 2027.
Why is that significant? 27, why would he wait? Because
they're rebuilding the military.
Right.
And I think one of the other things that's not lost on Xi and his colleagues in Beijing is the much vaunted Russian military has been tremendously embarrassed in Ukraine. So while he's been modernising the Chinese military and believing they're making good progress, I think they're taking stock. Putin thought that his defence minister, Choibo, had redeveloped the Russian military. It didn't happen. They are really battling, excuse the pun, really, really hard around Bakhmut and the Ukraine at the moment.
Closing the airspace for, less than half an hour, what's the point of that?
I think it's just a signal. And if you think back, Sarah, to when, we were going to have two countries, one system with Hong Kong, doesn't exist anymore. Pro-democracy activists are arrested, taken off the streets.
Yeah.
They have a long-term objective, and never underestimate Chinese plans. They really have a tremendous record of meticulous planning and eventually getting where they want to go. And they want Taiwan back.
No, but right now, it is 2023, and you actually mentioned 4 years. The time that most people, including myself, are looking at whether a PLA is fully combat ready is by 2027. And the idea why the year 2027 comes up is actually because Xi Jinping mentioned that the full modernization of the PLA army has to be completed by 2027. But obviously, whether she decides to forcefully military reunify Taiwan by 2027 is still yet to be seen. This is a concept that I heard from one of the most famous Taiwanese scholar that is very focused on cross-strait relations in Taiwan. He is Professor Wu Yushan. He is one of the most respected scholars I have in Taiwan. He actually brought up recently, it's not a new concept, but I want to refresh this idea with your listeners, is that there are actually 3 dimensions that sort of will determine whether Taiwan will be invaded or not. So the 3 dimensions that actually, it includes intention, capabilities, and cost. So when we talk about intention, you think it from the PLA's perspective, is whether they view that there is enough concrete evidence that they will need to send an army to invade Taiwan. The intention, what concrete evidence is whether there is a concrete evidence of people wanting to fight for Taiwan's independence. So if there's evidence, there's proof that Taiwan is seeking independence, they will give the PLA enough intention to send an army to invade Taiwan. When we talk about capabilities, it's obviously the possibility, is whether the PLA is capable enough of attacking Taiwan. And last is cost, is whether the cost of invading Taiwan is bearable for the PRC government. So it is always these 3 dimensions that determine whether PLA will actually attack Taiwan or not. But I would say that it's quite interesting is because until right now and to this moment, remember what I talked about earlier is that we in the past year, that the PRC is trying to do it internationally through various efforts and attempts to stress that Taiwan is trying to seek for independence or trying to make Taiwan a domestic issue. So they will actually give the PRC government enough intention internationally or give it enough lawful evidence that whatever they are doing is like, basically, just put it in perspective, for Russia to invade Ukraine, even though we on the outside we call it an illegal invasion, but the Russians will actually tell the Russian government, Putin would tell the Russians that, it is a legal invasion because the fact that this part of Ukraine believes that it is part of Russia, that's why we are there to liberate them. So you put it into Taiwan's context is that, they will actually think that, there's enough population in Taiwan that is seeking for independence. And not only that, when we talk about seeking independence, it's not the DPP part of seeking independence. It's right now we are actually seeing that the PRC is trying to tell the world that even if you support Republic of China, you does not support one China. So this actually makes it quite dangerous for people in Taiwan because most people in Taiwan actually wants to maintain the status quo. Street speaking to people, most people do not want a war. Nobody in Taiwan, most people would say that nobody wants a war to happen between the core straits. And most people would say that, oh, why can't we maintain the status quo? I can have my daily life as per normal. But in China right now is that we are seeing, especially the rhetorics coming out from the hardliners or the nationalists within China, is that even if you are not seeking a Taiwan's independence, the fact that you are trying to maintain status quo for as long as possible, they see it as quite a slap in their own face. We say the hardliners do not necessarily take up most of the Chinese population in China. But, if one fine day, this nationalists do have take an upper hand within the politics, that will actually pose a much larger danger for Taiwan. And when we talk about capabilities, as we mentioned earlier, within the past 10 years, 20 years, we have been seeing China trying very hard to improve their amphibious capabilities, by building enough vessels, by training their Eastern Theater Command, and so on. And as for cost, I think right now we are actually seeing that the US trying their best to help Taiwan to also warn China that if you do invade Taiwan, the cost is going to be quite great. Be it, let's say, international and all these sanctions, whether China is able to bear with these sanctions. These are all the warnings. And all of that, with all the missiles that Taiwan currently own, if let's say China takes a first strike on Taiwan and Taiwan counter strike back, onto China, whether will China be able to also take an equally forceful strike coming from Taiwan? These are some of the costs that the PRC leaders will have to keep in mind. And when we talk about Taiwan's politics, in turn, is that if you look from a more macro perspective at the pan blue and pan green camps in Taiwan, is that the pan blue camps will actually focus more on intentions. Obviously their job is they are trying very hard to tell China that, oh look, there are still possibility for both sides to talk peacefully. There are still both sides to maybe not about reunification peacefully, but also to have more open dialogues to talk with each other. But the pan-green side, meaning the DPP side, they actually see it that deterrence is a more effective way to reduce the risk of war. So they are actually putting more of their efforts on making the cost unbearable for PRC. But it's still very important, I think, for the international audience to look at how these three dimensions is actually a very integral part of the cross-strait relations.
Our purpose in going to Taiwan was to say that we have this strong relationship built on the status quo, which we support, which is really important because they're saying, well, we're trying to upset. No, the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, at the same time as our change of recognition, established the terms of our relationship, the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, and the 6 assurances. So there's no departure from that. But in keeping with that, we will not allow China to isolate Taiwan. Their pretext was our visit for them to do what they normally do, intensify. They didn't do it when the Senate went under Chairman Menendez of the Foreign Relations Committee. They just decided to do it this time.
I think it's important to focus on Pelosi's trip and how it's viewed by Taiwanese leaders in retrospect, since after she visited. Just to give a refresher for the audience, Pelosi was negotiating behind closed doors with the Taiwanese leadership to go and visit the island while she was still speaker. It was kind of seen as almost a victory lap and symbolic for her because she's so pro-Taiwan, pro maybe status quo, pro-independence, depending on how you view those terms. On the back end, though, in the United States, there were negotiations behind closed doors between the Biden administration and Speaker Pelosi. And the Biden administration was telling her, do not go. You are going to escalate things. And eventually, it came out in the news that the Biden administration was telling Pelosi not to go. People think that it was very likely leaked from Pelosi's office because she wanted to go. And as a result, what you had happen is you had it become a political issue here in the United States. And very rarely do foreign affairs issues actually become stuff that could impact our politics, right? Our politics is all focused on negative campaigning against each other and then domestic issues. However, China and Russia are two issues that could impact an election. So when it came out that the Biden administration was trying to prevent Pelosi from going, what happened? You had all moderate Democrats, the majority of the party, which is very pro-Taiwan. You had all Republicans, the majority of the party, which is very pro-Taiwan, come out and attacking the Biden administration. So at that point, she kind of had to go over to Taiwan, even though the Biden administration told her not to go. In retrospect, you mentioned that it was viewed as a massive escalatory event and can be used to demarcate a deterioration in relations. After she visited, China started escalating. How is her visit now viewed by Taiwanese leaders in retrospect? Should she have not gone?
I would say that the most people actually still view that her trip to Taiwan, it shows support for Taiwan. But I think the general public still welcome her visit. No, but as for the repercussions on that side, I think people are still quite divided over it. And some would actually put the blame actually more on China, is that because I don't know if you remember back then, Justin, is that there's actually a lot of rhetoric coming from the nationalists within PRC, is that if Pelosi's plane is going to land in Taiwan, they are going to fire a missile, to shoot down her plane, kind of thing. They are this kind of very hardliners, nationalistic people within PRC. So that also sort of escalates. And this kind of voices does not necessarily come from the PRC government. This actually come from some of the PRC public in that sense. So this sort of like escalates and put everybody in this triangle that no one could actually get out of. One analogy I always tend to bring up is that, if you remember, is that Pelosi actually wanted to visit Taiwan in April last year. But the trip couldn't happen was because Pelosi was down with COVID. But back then, when the news first broke about Pelosi wanting to visit Taiwan in April, there wasn't a lot of reports from China. Because back then, China was actually battling with COVID in Shanghai. So there's a lot of domestic kind of issues that affect China. So essentially, a lot of this focus couldn't be on these foreign issues. But obviously in April, it was post-Shanghai. It's just a perfect storm that happened at that point in time. And with Pelosi landing in Taiwan, all these images being broadcasted in China, there will obviously be a lot of, not only within the party, but also within the public, they will actually expect the PLA to do something about this. So that and at the same time, obviously, there are also hardliners within the PLA wanting to do something about it. And I would say that the Chinese obviously use this, to their own benefit, including what all the whatever they did eventually. And obviously that was also repeated in April this year. And right now, even until right now, we are also seeing the Chinese maybe every 2 to 3 weeks, the PLA are also still conducting this blockade of this massive aircraft incursions around Taiwan. I mean, on a daily basis, there's at least 10 around Taiwan, be it naval ships or aircrafts. But every now and then, every 2 or 3 weeks, you will see a sudden spike to maybe 20, 30, 40 aircrafts suddenly across the median line around Taiwan. So it has become quite a daily thing. Even the media don't really report about it because everyone's just like, oh, okay, so it's happening again. But I can tell it's happening every day.
There were reports that Speaker McCarthy was going to go visit Taiwan, but he changed his mind. How do you view that as an analyst, taking off your news hat and just giving us your opinion? Was that the right decision to maybe not visit, to try and tone down the hostilities and not continue the triangle of escalation, which you previously explained?
I mean, obviously, there's a report by FT that actually mentioned that it was actually President Tsai who actually sort of convinced McCarthy that they should actually meet in LA but not in Taiwan instead. I mean, I do not know what is the authenticity of the report, but no doubt, I mean, at least somebody who decided to talk someone out of it, or at least somebody decided not to do it in Taiwan. But I would say that, I do not like to really speculate on what didn't happen, but I would say that the Chinese still no doubt take it with quite a bad taste. So sometimes some people in Taiwan will say that, you know, be it you meet in Taiwan or you meet in LA, the Chinese is still is still doing the same thing. They send out the aircraft carrier, at this time, doing all this. If they meet in Taiwan, will they do the same thing? I think the Chinese will continue to use any of this opportunity in the near future. If Taiwan and US continue to meet, especially at such a high level kind of status, they will try to use every single reason, to practice. Because I mean, I tend to see it from a perspective is that the Chinese would always want to conduct military activities about Taiwan. It is not only to flex their military muscles, but it is to practice. What is the better reason to use every possible kind of meeting, say that, to basically tell the world, say that, oh, it's not that I want to do it on Taiwan, it's because you did this, that's why I did this. So it is quite unfortunate in that sense. But at the same time, I do not think that this is a reason that should actually deter US and Taiwan officials from meeting. Because I mean, I think right now when I visited the capital in March, it is actually from in Taiwan, we have heard that the support for Taiwan is bipartisan. But during my trip to the capital back then, uh, it was like confirmed that, oh, okay, it is really that bipartisan. I was actually quite surprised by it, to be honest. I mean, I heard about it, but seeing it with my own eyes is a totally different experience. I mean, people in Taiwan will appreciate it, but at the same time, I think people like myself will really hope that people in US will, not only the lawmakers, but and I hope more lawmakers could actually better understand the Taiwan issue. It is not a necessary black and white or anti-China thing, but I know that a lot of lawmakers in the States actually support Taiwan because that they are actually quite anti-China, but that shouldn't be the case. Is that I do hope that more people in US, lawmakers in US, or people really listening to this podcast could actually recognize that Taiwan's centrality is also quite an important issue. There are people living on this island. There are people's life at stake. People in Taiwan will suffer the most if Taiwan is turned into a battleground. Taiwan is not a pawn that is to be used between US and China.
I think I could speak for a lot of people in the United States as well. We don't want war. And for my trip over to Taiwan, I make a joke, but it's not really a joke. The people in Taiwan are as freedom loving, if not more freedom loving, than the people in the United States. It's one of the most beautiful islands I've ever been to. There's this beautiful lake that we saw that's next to the mountains, and the clouds come down and the water is so blue. It's, one of the main tourist spots that I'm forgetting. Everybody over there Americans loved the fact that we were on this diplomatic trip as congressional staffers to go visit. The food is amazing, and the media is really cool. You guys have a ton of political media, and you guys spar pretty vociferously back and forth. So for any listeners, go visit Taiwan, especially Taipei.
Yeah.
I'm biased, so I agree with you, and I think it's really important that we do focus on the human aspect of things, kind of just to follow up on the strong rhetoric and how Taiwan is not a pawn with the US-China relations. President Biden has taken the toughest stance on China in recent US history as a president, right? Whether it be sanctions on technology, whether it be harsh words, there's been a breakdown of communications between our Department of Defense, their defense officials over there. We shot down a few spy balloons, which I don't know how they were covered in Taiwan, but that was a huge national thing here in the United States. How do policymakers in Taiwan view the Biden administration's very tough on China approach? Is it something that is viewed favorably, or is it something that is viewed as, whoa, this has gotten a little out of hand. Maybe we step back here. Maybe we reopen dialogue. Help us understand how the Biden admin's stance on China is viewed.
I mean, Taiwan is a democracy, so obviously there are many different camps to this. But I would say that generally, to be honest, I would think that the most people are actually quite pro-peace and pro-US. You know, like when I talk about like pro-US, it doesn't mean that whatever the US government do means that equals to good. People will definitely support the US government policies. But I would say that comparatively, because of the animosity that stems throughout the history between cross-strait relations, the general population in Taiwan are US friendly. You know, they actually see US policies hopefully to be of some sort of benefits to Taiwan, but obviously there's also a couple of doubts. You know, when I talk about doubts, one thing that actually stems quite clearly is the TSMC issue. So the US government has actually come up with this very attractive package that attracted TSMC to set up their new plants in Arizona. And some people in Taiwan actually view this with some doubts, I would say. They actually say that even though, like, you know, with US wanting to also when we call rearrange and this whole global supply chain thing, you know, but you know, by moving TSMC out of Taiwan, some people actually think that, you know, this is actually not helping Taiwan, you know, because some people in Taiwan actually view that TSMC serves as a deterrence, you know, to any imminent invasion from the PLA, because the logic is that if PLA invade Taiwan and TSMC is bombed, the global supply chain will break down. And you know, and when talk about global supply chain, it does not affect only the world, but it also affect China, because China also depends quite a lot of these chips that's from TSMC. You know, so the logic comes from there. You know, but if Taiwan TSMC is moved out of Taiwan, the deterrence is non-existent, and US government actually support TSMC diversifying their plants worldwide. You know, so there's also obviously that the AIT has also been quite clear about it, that no, it is actually a US policy.
An American politician has sparked outrage in Taiwan this week by suggesting the US could destroy Taiwanese factories. Congressman Seth Moulton's remarks about a possible response to a Chinese attack were denounced in Taiwan and ridiculed in China.
TSMC is the pride of Taiwan. It's the biggest semiconductor producer in the world, making around 90% of the most advanced chips. And according to a US congressman, it may one day be wise to destroy it.
One of the interesting ideas that's floated out there for deterrence is just making it very clear to the Chinese that if you invade Taiwan, we're going to blow up TSMC.
If you do that, you have a $2 trillion economic impact on the global economy. This is a terrible idea.
I'm not promoting the idea. If China takes over TSMC, we could very well face the same level of economic consequences, not globally, but for the United States.
Seth Moulton's remarks made waves on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
But obviously there are some people in Taiwan who raised an eyebrow at that. And it wasn't helpful when, even though I know one of the US lawmaker did clarify that he didn't mean it that way. But I remember there was this guy who actually talked about that, oh, you know, if PLA invaded Taiwan, you know, then we should bomb TSMC kind of thing, you know. So that actually sort of made people in Taiwan a bit like, oh, do you really mean it kind of thing, you know. So that's why I say that it's quite important for, and I do hope that US lawmakers could actually sometimes put Taiwanese perspective, you know, into the stuff you say in public, because people in Taiwan actually watch US policies and lawmakers and the stuff they say with quite close scrutiny, you know, because I would say that because right now, you know, we're faced with such unfriendly neighbor that is really unwilling to talk and not willing to go on dialogues with Taiwan. People in Taiwan will actually basically look at the US for help, you know. So that is what we are seeing right now. But at the same time, I would say that the Biden's government's anti-China stance, some people see it with much. People in Taiwan do welcome it, because actually that also puts a lot of publicity on the issue of Taiwan, making more foreigners wanting to know about what the Taiwan issue is about, even though we know it is very complicated. There are just so many different camps, many people believe in many different things. Some people believe in Republic of China, some people in Taiwan, some people, it's just really very complicated. I do believe that US and Taiwan's relations is at an all-time high as compared to before because of Chinese expansionism internationally. And we're also seeing that not only US Taiwan, but Europe Taiwan, EU Taiwan ties is also at all-time high because of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But right now we are also seeing the US lawmakers trying their best to procure and make sure that the US arms to Taiwan will arrive on time and in time, and that is important because actually Taiwan purchased a lot of military equipment and ammunition from the US, but because of various reasons, be it the Russian-Ukrainian war or be it the global supply chain issue, these articles are not arriving in Taiwan on time. And Taiwan is also meeting with a close deadline. If people think that things will happen by 2027, right now we are 4 years from it. So whether we'll obviously Taiwan is also trying very hard. Right now, like starting from next year, 1st January, the conscription in Taiwan has resumed back to 1 year. But obviously some people think that 1 year is not enough, and I actually don't think 1 year is enough. And I would say that the domestic population in Taiwan, they are also trying very hard. People are going for lessons to learn about where to hide, where the air raid shelters, going for lessons, maybe in terms of maybe to help with the wounded kind of thing. But if you look at Ukraine's reaction after Crimea, they had 8 years to prepare, but I do not know whether there's enough time for Taiwan. That's one thing. But at the same time, I think that most people in Taiwan will still really hope that a war will not happen.
The US government reportedly fears the war in Ukraine is further delaying a backlog of weapons bound for Taiwan, according to the Wall Street Journal on Sunday. The billions of dollars worth of weapons sent to Ukraine since February has delayed the shipment of weapons valued at $19 billion to Taiwan, which is under threat from mainland China. The report added the continuous shipment of weapons to Ukraine is creating problems for the longer-term US strategy to arm Taiwan. Among the equipment not yet delivered are more than 200 Javelin anti-tank missiles and 215 surface-to-air Stinger missiles that were ordered several years ago. High-speed mobile artillery rocket systems and howitzers have also not yet arrived in Taiwan.
You mentioned U.S. selling arms to Taiwan. You mentioned supply chain issues, Ukraine, Russia being one of the big ones. South Korea is ordering a ton of stuff, and it's being backlogged from Eastern European orders. Is there any specific pieces of hardware or anything that the U.S. is not doing that Taiwanese military officials think that they should be doing to get these military articles, the hardware, over to Taiwan sooner? Like, is there one or two requests that they have for the Biden administration that can help calm everybody down and help everybody feel a little bit better?
Okay, with the 2023 NDAA, the US government has actually recently sent over the FIM-92 Stingers. Those Stingers are actually something that the Taiwanese government wanted to procure for a very long time, but was unable to. But what I know is that the US has actually sent them over to Taiwan secretly, but we sort of know it. That they are here in Taiwan. So that is quite a good thing. People in Taiwan actually welcome it. But one article that is actually delayed is actually the F-16 CD Block 70s. That is it was said that the two of these jets is scheduled to be delivered this year, but right now because of a supply chain issue, it will only probably come next year. And put it in mind is that even though Taiwan now has a fleet of, I think, 140 F-16 AB Block 20s, but upgraded to what they call the F-16Vs. But the pilots still need to undergo training for the F-16CDs Block 70, because even though they have worked with F-16s, but no doubt they still undergo this kind of training. So if this kind of articles are delayed, that also basically means that the pilots they'll be ready, but there are no jets to fly. And not forgetting that the Taiwanese Mirage are actually getting older, so that also means a delay in phasing out that kind of jets also. So there's obviously quite tight on Taiwan's side. What I know is that my government also wants to procure a couple of air-to-air missiles and that could be fired from the fighter jets, but some of it might have been delayed.
The U.S. core doctrine is deterrence for us and for our allies. And part of that deterrence is AUKUS, right? That is the
Yes.
Australia, US, UK. We're going to give nuclear submarines to Australia. That's just one example. How are U.S. multilateral efforts in the region, defensively speaking, seen by Taiwanese officials? And was AUKUS viewed as something that is favorable in the event either to prevent a war, or in the event of a war, now allies in the region will have capacity to get involved and help break an air or sea blockade and get the Taiwanese people the supplies that they need to endure such a horrible thing?
I mean, like this kind of international or multilateral kind of, be it AUKUS, be it Quad, I think people in Taiwan will welcome it generally, because, but the thing is that it's obviously people welcome it, but if a war, unfortunately, touch wood, do break out, will this come into play? It's always the question that people in Taiwan want to ask. Because until right now, obviously, because the US government has to maintain what we call the strategic ambiguity over Taiwan. So no doubt, the US government has not been very open as to whether they will or will not come to Taiwan's aid. And obviously, Taiwan's response to that is that no matter whether if there is anyone, be it will someone come or not, Taiwan will still be prepared to fight for ourselves. This is obviously what people in Taiwan needs to do it, because it's our own country. We need to protect it. But not forgetting that Taiwan only has a 23.75 million population, and the landmass is much smaller than Ukraine. Ukraine is 16 times of Taiwan, and not forgetting that Taiwan is sea-locked. And we are looking at PRC and the PLA. From a military correspondent point of view, if I am a PLA general, if I want to take down in Taiwan, I will make sure I will be able to take over Taiwan in 3 days and less than a week. But we will know that with all this, be it AUKUS, be it Quad, be it US bases in Japan, in Philippines, and every single thing that we are actually seeing the US trying to do right now, including, we have been seeing an increased military exercise in the Philippines between the US and Philippines. We are also seeing this trilateral exercise between US, Japan, and Philippines. And we are also seeing a lot of exercise that's happening between US and Japan. And we know that even though all these bases and all this preparation, all these people, in the fact that how Indo-PACOM is actually trying to move into around Taiwan near the Bashi Strait on all those, even though we have all these articles and people in place, if a war do break out, will there be enough time for all this foreign aid to respond in time to a PLC attack? That is a huge question mark we are talking about right now. Look at Ukraine. Even though there are US intelligence that stated very clearly that no doubt that Russia would invade Kyiv, but Kyiv have to hold out for at least 2 months before foreign aid actually start to arrive in Ukraine. Would Taiwan have that time? When I talk about how Taiwan is much smaller than Ukraine, and we are also looking at how the PLA is putting their focus on attacking the capital Strait. I'm bringing out an example. The annual Han Guang military exercise, that is the largest military exercise that is held annually in Taiwan, will be coming up at the end of July. So right now they are doing all these military preparations. And the Taiwanese army right now, they are the defense ministry, as compared to let's say 4 to 5 years ago when I first covered the Han Guang exercise. Previously, all these exercises tend to happen within the southern part or the central part of Taiwan. But right now, most of these exercises are very focused around Taipei, around the northern part of Taiwan, because they believe that in the event of an attack from PLA, they will believe that the PLA army will basically focus all their attack in the northern part of Taiwan, directed at the capital. It is just basically a direct strike, or I will not do it. So putting that, into perspective, we are faced with an authoritarian government who is very decisive in what they are going to do or what they have plans to do. A democratic government has its pros, but the cons of a democratic government is that you need to go through various laws, various policies, various votes to ensure, even if you want to send troops to help. So with that in mind, even till right now, US troops has not directly intervened in Ukraine, and US lawmakers have not basically passed any laws to basically allow it at the same time. If Taiwan is faced with a similar threat, will we have time? Will US have time to decide whether they want to send troops or not? This is one thing that people in Taiwan are thinking about.
So a recent poll, April 2023, 56% of US citizens support direct intervention in Taiwan, with only 12% opposing. So that's massive. I think that that's important to note. And lawmakers in the US, while they don't always act quickly, when there is a crisis, they can act very quickly. As we end our discussion here, I just wanted to thank you for coming on.
I actually really appreciate you having me on this podcast to talk about really various issues, because these are really very complicated issues.